Beethoven is the composer who perhaps has that incredible balance between the intellectual and the emotional, the personal and the universal. That he just can put almost all of his experiences into his music. He has that incredible command of form, but he also has that incredible command of intimacy and detail. The composer who almost could do anything in his sort of compositional technique. He could express anything that he wanted to. Sometimes young composers will ask me for advice on a piece that they're writing and say that they have a certain compositional problem. They're not sure how to solve it. And I'll think, well, you could look at this piece by this composer or this piece by another composer. And then I say, in this whole series of works, Beethoven dealt with that and he solved it really beautifully. Just study those. Sometimes Beethoven has that sort of key to almost everything. Beethoven's late works are just an absolute pinnacle. Really among the greatest works of art by any artist in any media, as far as I'm concerned. Every one of them is an utter world in itself. Each piece is almost a deep sort of philosophical statement, a way of trying to put together a different set of opposing things that seem irreconcilable, but somehow he manages to put them all together. This sonata, Opus 110, which I will be playing today, the 31st of his 32 sonatas. It was written around 1821. Interestingly, we even have despite the incredible depth that's in this piece, from some of his letters, he was almost irritated by having to kind of work on these sonatas. Like he wanted to be working on his Ninth Symphony as Mrs. Solemnis, but even the pieces that he wasn't even felt were challenges to him are peaks of the literature, and certainly to be peaks in the piano literature is really something extraordinary, considering the incredible amount of music, of great art music that we as pianists are blessed with. This particular sonata, I think, is a particularly unusual and personal expression of Beethoven. It has an incredible depth, range of emotion. Of all the sonatas, it might have the points of greatest sorrow expressed, but it also has the moments of perhaps the greatest joy that he expressed in any of his sonatas. The first movement is gentle, delicate, ethereal, music that kind of never really touches the ground, very, very lyrical. Not always that characteristic of his late music. It has a great simplicity and directness of expression. The second movement is it's almost the utter opposite. It's this kind of earthy, incredibly rough, rhythmic movement, full of these sort of sudden, willful and violent contrasts. There is a sort of a middle section, a kind of trio section, you could call it, that's so angular and dissonant. It's almost just pure energy and rhythm. Music reduced almost to its minimal elements. The final movement, I guess I consider it really extraordinary. In the 13 minutes of this movement, Beethoven almost goes through an entire lifetimes of experiences. It's basically put of many short sections and movements that all run into each other, making up one giant whole. It starts out with just 3 or 4 measures. Very, very simple, just a few chords that are almost like a scene setter for an opera, like just a brief phrase that sets our mood before the curtain rises. After that, there is something that's something akin to an operatic recitative translated to the piano. Again, something that goes through all these subtle nuances of emotion, and it's sort of rhythms are closer to those of, say, speech than to song. This is followed by a sort of a movement that is marked Arioso dolente, or sad song, or you could almost call it wailing song. Beethoven rarely puts programmatic titles to any of his movements. There are just a few places in all of his works that are, and most of them are very, very, well known. This piece is a really, really sad and despairing work. It comes to an end, and after that, a fugue enters. Beethoven loved writing fugues in his late works. It's a form that he kind of returned to, and the vast majority of his late pieces have a fugue, or at least a section that's in a sort of fugato style. In contrast to sort of the really wild, rough fugues of, say, the Sonata Opus 101 or the Hammerklavier, this is a rather smooth, well-behaved fugue, rather Bachian in its sort of beautiful counterpoint and smooth transitions to new sections. This fugue gradually gains in energy, and it becomes more and more joyous and seems to be building up to an absolutely triumphant climax, when at the last second it's kind of cut off with this sort of dominant seventh chord that is totally incomplete, and he has an arpeggio that goes up and down and leaves us hanging for a moment. It resolves into a return of the Arioso, but the Arioso this time is marked exhausted and plaintive, that it's lost all of its energy. The Arioso melody is now broken up. All the little parts of it are separated by these little rests, almost as if the singer doesn't have the breath to connect any of the words together. Really, really, really one of the most profoundly sad movements that Beethoven ever wrote. It almost comes to an ending. I sometimes feel like if there were one more note to that ending, the work he'd have to end it all right there, and the work wouldn't be able to go on. But instead of that final note that we are expecting, we get this major chord, which is then just repeated over and over in this sort of very slow pulsations, low chord. And almost as if when things are really, really dire, all that's left is sort of like this sort of basic life force, a heartbeat that just sort of keeps us going, that will to live, maybe we could call it. Out of this, we get a return of the fugue, though this time the fugal melody is inverted, upside down. The first version of the fugue is this rising figure. It's very, very hopeful. It has an optimistic feel. The inversion has much more of a delicacy, a vulnerability, an uncertainty, which is what one might express after having come out of some, very dire emotional place. This fugue gradually kind of builds up, but Beethoven introduces a whole lot of interesting fugal devices in here, rhythmic augmentation and diminution, where the fugue theme is doubled in speed and then it's quadrupled in speed, and then also done like much more than 1/4 as fast as it usually would go, and all these things going on all at once. It's very interesting rhythmically. Nothing really lines up. It almost feels like that the music is kind of like everything's getting out of focus, out of control. There is no base to anything, nothing to hold on to. The music kind of pulls itself back together, and then gradually it gathers in energy, and through the rest of the piece it becomes more and more joyous and triumphant, and it ends in sort of a blazingly joyous ending that's maybe the greatest, most joyous point in all of the 32 sonatas.